Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Hogue. I know all of you here, which is a blessing. Welcome. I'm the founder of Root to Rise. Under Root to Rise, as you know, is Morning Magic Collective, and Harley is a Morning Magic Collective member, and I'm so grateful that she's here to share her magic with us today. It's a long time coming, Harley, so I'm going to let you take it away, but as we're welcoming new people in, and as you guys are getting settled, if you haven't already, definitely check in the chat and let us know these 3 topics so we can get to know each other even more. Yeah, stay to the end. Little surprise, has to do with Kristen. There's like a part 2 of this. But Harley, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you and talk about self-compassion. I'm really excited to see what everyone's saying, that we love self-compassion and we're always looking to learn more. So hopefully this is like a little bit of a new take on it. And we're kind of a smaller group. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute and ask. We can all talk if that works for people. And so I'll start by telling you just a little bit about myself. I'm a business and life coach. I have my own practice and I work with a lot of different kinds of people, but the common thread is really an idea of like fulfillment with life. So I work with a lot of people who have successful careers or businesses, but they're still feeling kind of like something's missing or like there's a lack of intimacy with life. And I'm also a yoga and mindfulness teacher. And so compassion is a great topic to bring all of those things together. I used to be in tech. So that was like my past life. I worked at a startup and I was running a big team and fun things. I love food. I love to cook. That's like my favorite hobby. I've been fostering dogs, and those are just a couple of fun facts. And so I want to start by talking about what I mean by radical self-compassion, because I think it's important that we're all on the same page about like why we're here and what we're talking about. And I think self-compassion gets talked about a lot, but not really defined as like, well, what does that really mean to be compassionate with yourself? And so this is like a quick definition. There's obviously a lot of different ways to define it. But one way I think about it is it's the practice of offering ourselves the same warmth and caring we'd offer a good friend when we're going through pain or challenge. And so there's a couple of different parts of that. The first one is the word practice. I think someone threw that in the chat earlier. Self-compassion is really like an action. It's not a quality. So it's not something that like we get one day and then we just have it. It's really an action that we take with ourselves throughout our lives. So that's practice. And then, so it's the practice of offering ourselves this warmth and caring. There's a lot of different words you could use to describe the quality of the attention of compassion, love, warmth, caring, friendliness, and whatever resonates for you is great. But a lot of people find it helpful to just think, what's the natural reaction I would give if someone I loved was struggling? And like, that's compassion, you know, it's a natural reaction that we as humans have to suffering. And then in self-compassion, the last part of this, it's what happens when we are having a challenge. So we can find it really easy to give loved ones in our life this natural response of compassion, but it gets a little bit harder when it's us going through the challenge. And so I think it's also helpful to define self-compassion by talking about what it's not and why, because I think it illuminates some of the really important nuances of self-compassion, and they're really the things that make it really special. So the first one is self-esteem. And self-esteem is really like a positive judgment of ourselves. And it's not bad, but it's different because it's conditional. If we have a good judgment of ourselves, then our mind has to have an idea of like the bad side. So we're either comparing ourselves to someone else, or it's conditional upon success that we are having. And self-compassion, on the other hand, is specific to when things aren't going great. And in my opinion, like that's when we want to treat ourselves kindly the most, right? When things aren't going great. So that's self-esteem. The second one is self-pity. And I think the word self-pity is kind of harsh, but it actually, a lot of people do think that giving yourself compassion is kind of feeling bad for yourself, or being like, oh yeah, this is, you know, my life's the worst and this sucks. And there's a little bit of similarity, but self-pity is really different because it leaves you identified with your struggles and with the pain. And it's like, my life is bad, I'm bad, and that's why I feel bad for myself. And a really important part of self-compassion is that it recognizes the common humanity of suffering, or rather that every person on earth suffers. And so there's nothing bad or wrong or weird about the fact that you're having a challenge or that you're in pain. It's like actually so normal. Everyone struggles. And so I love that. I love that self-compassion brings in this idea that, oh yeah, this is normal. This is what I should expect. Next thing is positivity. I think a lot of people think of self-compassion as kind of like, I love myself, I'm the best, I love my body, I love my job, kind of like this, just loving everything about yourself in your life. And of course, you probably know that that's not the case. And I like to use the example of like, if there's a part of you that's like, oh, I don't love my body, rather than being like, oh, how do I change that so that that part of me doesn't feel that way? It's like, oh, how can I extend compassion to that part too? And how can it be like, yeah, that makes sense with the society you grew up in and all of the things that you've been through. And the last one here is self-acceptance. And self-acceptance is the closest to self-compassion. But I like to point out a little difference, which is like, if you can imagine you're having a really painful thought, maybe you're anxious and you're worried about something. Acceptance is like, okay, that thought is there. And self-compassion is like, okay, that thought is there and it really hurts. So it just adds this extra step of recognizing the suffering and the pain there. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah, okay. And so going off that, there's really three key elements of any self-compassion attitude or practice. The first one is self-kindness versus self-judgment. So just acknowledging where we're at and not judging it as good or bad, just kind of warmly embracing it. There's the element of common humanity versus isolation, which is what we already talked about. It's acknowledging that like this is universal, right? This isn't just me. And then finally, it's mindfulness versus over-identification. So it's basically the act of kind of observing what's going on instead of being in it, which you all probably know intuitively the difference there. Okay, and then last, why the word radical? So this is a radical self-compassion workshop. And to me, the word radical means like extreme, right? It's like supporting something that's not the social norm. And this workshop is really focused on how we take this idea of self-compassion and we apply it to specifically the parts of ourselves that we find hard to love, and even that we're taught aren't lovable, that we shouldn't love. We should try to change them, right? And that could be different for everyone, depending on how you were raised and where you are in your life. But we obviously all have those parts. And so that's what we're going to be working with today. Any questions on or comments on just the definition of self-compassion before we keep going? Okay, so we're going to do a really short practice. We're going to do a longer one later, but this is really just to drop in, get present, and also just to start exploring our own relationship with self-compassion. So get comfortable. You can stay seated upright, but just get in a position that's both relaxed but alert so you don't fall asleep. And you can let your eyes closed if that feels good for you, or you can cast your gaze downward. And just start to notice the natural rhythm of your breath. Noticing if it's deep or shallow. Just noticing without judgment. And now starting to bring your attention into the body. And releasing any tension that feels easy to release. Maybe relaxing the shoulders, the jaw, the tongue, the base of the tongue, the little muscles around your eyes, the forehead, the top of the head. Just noticing what this more relaxed presence feels like. And now letting your weight with each exhale sink even further into the chair below you. Really feeling the support of the earth below you. Now bringing your attention into the area of the heart. I want you to drop in the question, right in this moment, what's in the way of you fully accepting yourself exactly as you are? And staying in your body, just seeing what comes up. Maybe you feel a sense of openness, and maybe you feel some tightness or resistance. Whatever's coming up is perfect. And whatever came up, just sending some love and acceptance, just letting that be there. And as this comes to a close, just taking one last deep breath. And coming back whenever you're ready. And sharing in the chat if you feel comfortable. If anything came up for you when you asked the question of what was in the way of you loving or accepting yourself right now, just as you are. Carolyn says old pattern, old grooves, old conditioning. Beautiful. All the things I tell myself I'm going to do, but then don't or make excuses for. Yes, totally. Great. And so what we're going to go into now is what makes it so hard for us to have self-compassion. We'll do this. And the first thing that often comes up, which I think speaks a little bit to what, is it Ollie or Ali?
Ali.
Ali, okay. Speaks to what Ali said, is that we often believe we need to judge ourselves or to speak to ourselves harshly. Generally, just we don't believe we believe if we accept ourselves, we won't change or we won't become better. And you know, if you explore that belief, I think everyone can decide if it's true for them. But often we find that judging ourselves into change isn't actually that effective, right? It's like, if you think of it as like a parent with their child, you can try to use fear or basically try to use fear to get the child to change, and maybe it'll work in the short term, but it doesn't tend to be super sustainable, right? And there's a lot of side effects, like the child getting really stressed out or having performance anxiety. And the same thing can really be true for us. And there's actually, you know, a paradox that when we accept ourselves, sometimes it becomes easier to change because it frees up some energy that we used to use to judge ourselves or to think about all the things we've done wrong. And instead, we're in the present moment, we accept what's already happened, and we have all this extra creativity and energy and openness to move forward. So I like to say accepting the present is not saying that that's what's going to be in the future, right? It's just accepting what has already happened, what is reality. The second common thing that gets in the way of people having self-compassion is that we don't want to feel. And as we mentioned, compassion is like a natural human response to suffering. But we can only have this response or feel this response to the extent that we're willing to feel and notice that suffering. And I think this is really obvious in giving compassion to other people. Like we can walk by someone that's unhoused on the street, and if we have our hearts closed off, we don't always feel the pain of that, and then we don't feel compassion for that situation. But if you were to open to it, you would feel that compassion. And it's a little more confusing with ourselves because we're the ones suffering, but as we know, we don't always open to that, right? We can distract ourselves or not really acknowledge that it's happening. Those are just a couple of reasons. Obviously, there's a ton of reasons we're not naturally self-compassionate. Mostly, as Carolyn was mentioning, like we're not conditioned to be compassionate with ourselves. So it's a practice that we have to build. And last thing on self-compassion before we jump into our little bit about parts work is, why is self-compassion important? And I think probably intuitively, we all already have a sense of this. But for me, self-compassion is really a path to feeling whole and worthy and good that doesn't require us to fix ourselves all the time or really fix ourselves at all. And I think a lot of people, especially people who do a lot of personal development, end up sometimes in a cycle of wanting to get better and better and fix ourselves. And if you don't have that foundation of wholeness, you're always going to be in that cycle. And so I think self-compassion is a really important foundation. And of course, all human life includes pain and failure and suffering and challenge. That sounds really intense, but it's true. And the way that we treat ourselves through that experience is really significant. there's a study that showed there was some soldiers that came back from the Middle East, and they measured that their amount of compassion for themselves was more influential on their the likelihood of them getting PTSD than the amount of time or combat that they saw. So it was really like the way that we are with ourselves can be just as impactful as what we're experiencing in life, which I find really powerful. Okay. So let's talk about our parts. And just quickly, again, to say, what do parts of ourselves have to do with self-compassion? So often we find it hardest to be compassionate with ourselves when we're feeling or behaving in a way that doesn't align with the person that we consciously want to be, right? So, for example, if we want to be a successful, badass business person, but we're procrastinating, or we want to be positive and upbeat, but we're feeling depressed and low. Those are the times when we can find ourselves being like, what is wrong with me? Why aren't I acting the way I want to? And what's really happening is that we have this conscious self that wants to be a certain way. And in those moments, there's parts of us that are compelling us to be a different way. And it can be confusing because we sometimes believe that our conscious mind is really running the whole show. But really, when these parts are taking over and they're dictating our actions or our feelings, that's when it can be hard to be with them, because we really want them. Our natural reaction is to want them to go away, right? We want to be back in charge. We want to get rid of them. And so I find it really supportive for people to have a framework and an understanding for what these parts are and how to think about them, how to identify like what they want and why they're here. And that can help us bring acceptance to them and help us work with them a little bit more directly. So I'm going to use a parts framework that is the one I like, which is internal family systems. Does anyone have any familiarity with that? A little bit. Okay. It's really fun. I'm going to do a super high level overview because obviously we don't have very much time. You could do like years of study on this, but I'm going to do just a little bit, and just know that you don't have to know all these details to work with these parts. So just absorb what you do, and I think it'll be plenty. So internal family systems is basically this framework that believes that it's the nature of our mind to be broken into different parts. You could think of them as little sub-personalities. And they can be experienced in lots of different ways. So emotions, feelings, body sensations, actions, all of these different things. And parts will try to take over your system when they feel threatened or unsafe. So you can imagine that they're kind of in the background, and then they see something, danger coming, and they basically take over your system. And that's when you feel them controlling either your emotions or your behaviors. And the last part is that all parts have positive intent. So you can imagine that when they're taking over because they feel threatened, they're just trying to protect you. We've all probably heard like your inner critic is just trying to protect you. And so this is just a little bit more detail on that. And so there's two different types of parts, and I'll explain them briefly, which is the first is exiles. And these are young, vulnerable parts of us that form when we're young in reaction to really big challenge or trauma. And so you can imagine things like big experiences of rejection, or big experiences of feeling unloved, or big experiences of shame will form these little parts of us called exiles. And you can think of them, I think of them sort of similar to like the inner child, but there's a lot of them. And they have a lot of extreme emotion, and they're young. And what happens is we form these protector parts around these exiles, and it's the protector's job to make sure that we never feel that way again. And so if we have an exile that, let's say, got on stage when they were little and like forgot a line in a play, this happened to my little sister, and they felt just like so ashamed in front of all of these people, right? You might develop these protector parts that are like, okay, we're never going to let that happen again. And there's two types of projectors. This is where it gets to be a lot of information, but I think it's fun. There's manager protectors, and they're the ones that like run our day-to-day lives. They're like our office managers. And they attempt to keep us in control of every situation and relationship to protect us from these feelings. So if it's like, let's say you have the public speaking experience, it's like that manager is making sure you're not in a career where you're going to have to public speak. It's making sure that you are like not signing up for anything where that's going to happen. Another example, if you have like an exile around rejection, which probably everyone does, your manager might be like making sure that it might be like bringing up anxiety if you think about dating or different things like that. And so they're kind of like proactive. They're making sure that our life feels safe. And then the firefighters are like the emergency last resort. And they react when our vulnerabilities are activated in an effort to control or extinguish the feelings. So let's say, again, back to the example with rejection, you do end up going on a date and the person says, yeah, I had a good time, but I'm not interested. The firefighter is going to get activated and be like, okay, how can we make sure that we like extinguish or numb these feelings? And they often use things like distractions or addictive behaviors. So it's like, okay, why don't we watch Netflix, or why don't we eat a pint of ice cream, or all of these different coping mechanisms that we have to make the difficult emotions go away or feel less intense when they do come up. Any questions on these before we move on? Okay. And so the last part of this, this model, and then we'll get into a little bit more practice, is the self. And so when we're talking about, oh, good. I know, I love learning about this stuff. So when we're talking about these parts, it's like, okay, so are we our parts or are we something else? And in IFS, they call like our essence, who we really are, the self. And there's so many different words for it, like your higher self or the witness, lots of different things from different philosophies. But in essence, the self it's not a part because it's always there, and it's never, you're born with it. It's just like the essence of who you are. And it's beautiful because you know that the self, that you're in self energy, that you're really like identified with your core rather than a part, because you are having a natural experience of compassion and curiosity and calm. And so in the moments where you don't feel that way, it means that you're blended or identified with one of these parts of yourself. And yeah, you can think of it like if you're in meditation and you're like embodying witness consciousness, you are totally in your center, you're in your essence. And then in everyday life, we're less conscious, we're less compassionate. And so, yeah, Kelly said, you can definitely feel when you're acting from a part or from the self. So it can be really intuitive, and it can also be hard to know. So how do we work with our parts? Let's see, I'll start with this slide. Basically the same way that you work with anything, which is kind of in meditation or in some kind of experience where you're going into your body and experiencing parts of your subconscious that way. And you can do this formally, like meditating every day or visiting your parts. We're going to do a formal practice in a little bit. But you can also do it informally, meaning like as these things are activated, you can, in that moment, do a quick practice, even with your eyes open. And so I'll show you what the elements of practice are, but even just like intuitively, if you notice you're acting from a part or you notice one of these parts is being activated, just noticing that that's happening, taking a breath into that is like, that's a good start, right? And so we'll get into like how to offer them compassion, but even just starting to become aware is the first step of practicing with these parts. And I really encourage you to do this regularly, to practice formally and informally. And that's because these practices really build self-trust. So if you think of yourself as like you're this self and you're managing this team of parts, you really want them to trust you. And even just to access them can be really hard. Like these are parts that they're protecting us from feeling. And so going in and really feeling them is not always easy. It's like, yeah, are you willing to feel, but also do they trust you to feel, if that makes sense? It's not always our choice. We can feel blocked from really accessing certain parts of ourselves. And the more that you're coming in and visiting your system without expectation and without basically just with love, the more that it's going to open to you. I love a story by Tara Brach, which is about an anthropologist. His name's George Shaler, and he was going to work with gorillas and study this species. And basically he came out and he had like way more information than anyone had ever gathered. They were like, how did you get so much information? And he said, I didn't bring a gun. And it was basically this idea of like every anthropologist who had gone before him brought a gun with them. And we don't know if gorillas know what guns are, but there was something about their energy, something about the way they went in that was like with aggression, right? Or with fear. And so it's the same when we approach ourselves, like our body knows if we're coming in wanting it to change or wanting it to be different versus genuinely coming in with the intent of loving and accepting how it is. And so anyway, all that's to say, the more that we practice, the more that we're going to build trust and the more that we're going to be let in to feel what's really there. Okay, so elements of practice, I'll talk through these super briefly and then we'll just practice. But this is in case you want to practice on your own ever. Basically, the process is to connect with your target part. And even in that moment, even just recognizing puts you back into your self energy more so, right? So when we're identified with a part, we can't see it. And so even just noticing and connecting with your target part creates a little bit of distance. And then you want to just take a moment to allow it to be there. And next step is exploring it in your body. So you're connecting with your part, you're letting it be there. Then you're taking some time to be like, okay, what does this feel like? Where does this live in my body? The next step is to start to investigate and actually ask a few questions. And the most important thing you want to understand about the part is like, what does it want from you? And I call this the deeper desire, because a lot of times our parts, when they come up, are like wanting us to procrastinate or I keep saying eat ice cream, but eat ice cream or watch Netflix. But below that is a deeper desire. And so we want to figure out what that is so that basically we're not tied to listening to our parts. We're not doing exactly what they want, but we're still hearing them, and we're hearing what they want, and we're giving them what they really need. And that's the last step, which is really nurturing and sending compassion to that part of yourself. Okay. So let's do another practice. So get comfortable again. And what we want to do first is pick a part that you want to get to know better. And the way you do this is just by identifying either a behavior or an emotion that is recurrent in your life that you want to get to understand better. And ideally that you kind of are resistant to, like you're like, oh, I don't like that I do that. And so you can close your eyes and take a couple of deep breaths. And I want you to connect with this part by, again, bringing to mind the behavior or the emotion that you want to work with. And see if you can notice where it's located in your body. And if you're having trouble feeling it, if you're feeling numbness, that's totally fine. You can also work with that feeling of numbness and get to know that part a little bit better. But once you're connected, just really letting that sensation be there. Sometimes it's helpful to whisper, yes, or you belong. Just let that part know that you are open to it. Maybe letting it know that it's welcome here as long as it wants to stay. And once you've connected with this part, notice how you feel toward that part of you. And honestly see what comes up. If it's a sense of compassion, beautiful, curiosity. But if you feel resistance to that part or you want it to go away still, just acknowledging that. And if you're feeling resistance, that means another part is coming up, and just asking that part if it's willing to step aside. And if it agrees, you'll feel some opening in the mind and the heart. And checking again, seeing how you feel toward this part of you. Now that we're feeling curiosity and compassion, we just asking this part what it wants you to know. When we ask questions, just drop it into that part of your body and wait for something to come up. And now asking the part, what is it afraid would happen if it didn't protect you? And whatever's happening for you, taking a moment to show some appreciation for this part, for trying to protect you in this way, for working so hard to keep you safe. And finally, asking the part what it most needs from you. How does it want you to be with it? And now moving into nurturing this part, whatever it asked you for, see if you can send that energy of love or acceptance or comfort or safety directly to that place in your body. You can see if it feels nurturing to place a hand on that part of your body. And try whispering phrases like you're safe, you're loved. Now, giving the part one more thank you for opening up. Now dropping the part, but staying in your meditation. Just taking a moment to experience this self energy. Noticing that you're able to take care of these parts of yourself, to make them feel safe. You have everything you need to make yourself feel loved. Whenever you're ready, you can take a deep breath. Wiggle your fingers and your toes. Take your time to come back. And if anyone wants to share anything about what came up for them or how that was in the chat, feel free. Beautiful, Marianne. Thank you for sharing. Carolyn, yeah, it's pretty cool when you ask yourself a question and the answer just kind of like pops in, right? Kelly, want to go deeper? Yeah. Allie. I feel like when I'm being my best self, I lose self-consciousness. Yeah. Yeah, because self-consciousness is probably a part of you, right? And so when you're in that self energy, it probably feels like it melts away. Beautiful. Thank you all for sharing. It's so nice to hear what different people experience, and it's so different every time. So I'll make sure in the email that Kelly sends out after this to include some more resources about how to do this practice again. Sometimes people get a message when they visit with their parts that's like, when they thank them, it's like, will you come back? Or some kind of feeling along those lines. And so if you feel called, it's a nice practice to keep visiting that part or getting to know other parts as well. The last thing I'll say before we go to conclusions is something I recommend for informal practice, like what to do in the moment when you feel a part getting activated, is rain. I don't know if you guys have practiced rain before. It's made pretty famous now by Tara Brach, but it's basically a quick process. Well, it's not a quick process, but it's quick to remember the steps of it. And it's really like, okay, recognize what's happening, take a moment to allow it, investigate it in your body. That doesn't mean like think about it, but investigate in your body and then nurture. So I'll also send out some practices on Tara Brach's website that you can use to get familiar with this process so you can use it in the moment. And so in conclusion here, kind of to take this full circle, self-compassion when we're talking about our parts is not about like doing whatever they want or letting them run the show. It's really quite the opposite. It's like coming back into our self energy and allowing our parts to like be there as they are and to be seen and understood at a deeper level. So finding out what they are actually wanting from us, whether that's love or safety or acceptance, and really giving that to them, fulfilling their needs on this deeper level. And yeah, I think self-compassion is just like this beautiful path to feeling whole and good that's always available to us. Like in any moment, no matter the circumstances of your life or no matter what you're feeling, self-compassion is available because it's not about what's going on. It's about how we relate to it. And so in my eyes, it's a really beautiful practice. Yeah, So I think that's everything. We have a few minutes for questions if anyone wants to come off mute and ask anything or put it in the chat.
Harley, thank you so much. That was so beautiful. I think it sounds like it was powerful for all of us. And I think that it's always so beneficial to have these different tools to get to know ourselves better and in a new way. Sometimes our old ways just become habit and we need something new to spice it up and bring in more compassion and love and acceptance. So thank you so much, Harley, for giving us this gift.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It was really great to feel your energy, and I could see everyone really in the practice, and your shares were really beautiful and make me feel so grateful to get to be here with you.
Yay. Well, thank you. And we're going to be sending out a replay of this with all of Harley's information if you want to connect with her further, or if something comes up after you sat with us for a little bit and you want to reach out to her, definitely do. And thank you for being here. And Harley, thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us. We're gonna, if you guys are interested, Kristen has so nicely invited us to do a yin practice with her. So some movement. She's gonna share the Zoom link. If you guys want to transition from this into that, you're more than welcome. If you can't make it, that's okay too. Kristen, do you want to, you can come off here if you want to say a quick something.
Hey, sure. So the class I teach on Wednesdays is really nice. It's probably just going to be about 35 minutes of deep kind of calm stretching. And then I teach a 5-minute body scan. That's like a pretty intensive body scan, and then do like a long shavasana after that. So if you've had a day or you really just want to chill out before you go to sleep, I highly recommend. It'll zonk you out. And thank you so much, Harley, for that. That was really wonderful.
Thank you, Kristen. So nice. So I will see you guys there, or hopefully I'll see you soon. We have an event next week as well, but there's always some things going on, as you guys know. Thank you, and thank yourselves also for being here tonight. And thank you, Harley. Have a good night, everyone. See you soon.